Welcome back to episode 28 of Beyond the Spot. We are decolonizing healing one brain at a time. I am your host, Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, licensed professional counselor, and I felt a strong urge to follow up with last week's episode having to do with perspectives around this idea of no contact. And so this week's episode, The Aftercare of Boundaries, the healing that happens once the boundary is set, is where I am. Last episode, we told the truth about no contact from various perspectives, and not as punishment, but as a response to rupture that was never repaired. But here's what most people don't understand and we don't talk about enough. The boundary isn't the end. It's the physiological beginning. Stephen Porges, who's big in the mental health field around the polyvagus system, reminds us that the nervous system shifts states the moment safety is threatened or restored. So when you set a boundary, especially with family, your autonomic nervous system moves into a new posture. And one may not recognize it yet, right? And not only you may not recognize it as of yet, but your nervous system may not even recognize the new posturing. That's why after a boundary, people often feel shaky or even guilty, numb, uncertain, lonely, relieved and terrified at the same time. Your body is not wrong. Your body is adapting. This episode, this conversation is about what comes next. We're coming from a perspective of aftercare, integration, reconnection with the self. Because oftentimes when we've been inculturated, acculturated, for some even groomed, or even the idea of programmed or conditioned. Excuse me. And then we have that awakening to our sense of self, what we want, what we believe, how pain feels for us, what we accept, what we decline. But even before going there today, I want to invite you, they and them, to take a breath with me. This is your breath. It is a breath of truth, a breath of self-reference, which we don't get to do often. And oftentimes, especially for Indigenous folks, hardly ever are we invited to simply take a breath of truth according to you, they, and them. To take a breath of self-reference, centering breath with your sense of self. And just a reflective invitation here. Where in your body do you feel the residue of the boundary you set? And just notice that. Welcome back. Glad you're here. Thank you. Beyond the Spot, Decolonizing Healing One Brain at a Time, is a podcast that weaves, my first love, of course, brain spotting, and somatic informed modalities with embodied healing, cultural consciousness, and real talk about trauma, resilience, and recovery. Hosted by Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, a licensed professional counselor, spiritual healer, and the first Black female brain spotting trainer in the world. Each episode dares to dismantle mental health myths, uplift lived experiences, and restore collective wisdom. One conversation at a time. Beyond the Spot podcast is for educational purposes and is not therapy. Please reach out to licensed medical and mental health professionals. Thank you. Let's start here. Boundaries are not endings. They're actually nervous system events. A boundary is not a moral stance. Sometimes it could be viewed in so many ways, but I'm telling you what it's not. It's not a personality change. It's not even a relational act alone. A boundary is a nervous system event. Deb Dana teaches this through Polyvagal Theory, that your system constantly asks one question: am I safe? And when you finally say no more, your system doesn't register empowerment first. It registers change. And all change, even good change, is destabilizing to the nervous system. Okay? And so, as we talk about this idea of aftercare, coming off of actually setting boundaries and what that can feel like physiologically in your body, throughout this episode, I do want to offer some interventions, right? Because I recognize that the majority of my listeners are practitioners, helping professionals, whether it be psychologists, marriage family therapists, licensed professional counselors, clinical social workers that are licensed, what have you. So as I build this episode, it was important for me to go beyond the what and to give some support with the how. So even as we start right here, around boundary setting and what that looks like physiological in the body, I do want to invite you to identify the change spot. Um, and so with identifying the change spot, that's as simple as, find that part of your body that feels the after of the boundary. And as you notice that somatically, go ahead and anchor your gaze. And as you anchor your gaze, just notice if it trembles or tightens, or even if it wants to collapse. Perhaps it wants to run. Let the body show you the truth that the mind is still catching up to. Okay? And I do want to offer a phrase for containment, which is, my system is adjusting. I am not unsafe. Okay? And so, yeah, because we get into a lot of what. What I love about brain spotting, what I love about somatics is there's support when it comes to the how, right? Because most people can get the what. I think when it comes to the how of a thing is where we can get, a little bit discombobulated. And also, let's identify collapse after boundaries, right? And so boundaries destabilize the identities we've lived inside. Okay. Murray Bowen taught that families create roles to maintain equilibrium, not health, but equilibrium. This is going back to 1978. Okay. So when you set a boundary, you aren't just removing yourself from conflict. You're exiting the role that held the system together. right? Because when it comes to family dynamics and what that looks like, we know that we all play a role. And when any role shifts, it shifts the trajectory of that family dynamic or that family system. And I got to shout out to my people, Bell Hooks, right? And as Bell Hooks has shared with us and said, love cannot exist without justice. Sometimes the boundary is the justice the child or the parent never received. Okay? And even when we talk about Frantz Fanon, who reminds us that identity under oppression becomes performative, not organic. That's Fanon back in 1952. So these aren't new notions here. I just think the application is becoming more to our awareness. They're becoming more insightful. So when you break a toxic role, you feel like you're breaking yourself, but you're not. You're finally meeting yourself. And I just want to give a reflective invitation here. What role did you leave behind when you set that boundary? And who are you without that boundary? Ask yourself that. What role did I leave behind when I set that boundary? And who am I without that role? Because let's be clear, it is not uncommon for shame and guilt, right? And so even when I talk about shame and guilt, they aren't moral. They're somatic imprints. And this is coming from the works of folks in the field as well. So Brene Brown describes shame as a socially constructed emotion, trained into us through messages of belonging and identity. Be clear, we're always becoming. Okay. Even when we look at Resma, Mannequins, and how he deepens this by saying that shame is also somatic inheritance, a residue of generational survival. And for those of us who are clear about generational healing and what that looks like from a generational frame, many of us can agree with that. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So when you set a boundary, your body may flood with guilt. Guilt you didn't earn. And need I say, guilt that isn't even yours. Guilt that belongs to lineage, to culture, to systems that rewarded your silence. Your guilt is familiar, not factual. Pause for a moment with that. When I say that guilt is familiar and oftentimes not factual, and as I've come to learn, there is guilt and shame, and there's also traumatic guilt and shame that we take on that actually belongs to those who have oppressed us, who have wounded us, folks that have harmed us, folks that have perpetrated violence towards us, right? And especially depending on distance and relationship, how so many people have been harmed familiarly by family, right? And how oftentimes it can feel like the trauma or the shame belongs to you, but I'm telling you it doesn't. So I just want to support you right now with a intervening of a shame release spot. Yeah, just scan your body and notice where shame heats or tightens or curls, where you can feel it physiologically, undeniably, whether it's on your temperature channel of knowing, whether it's on your affect, um, It's all physiological, right? Because there's a physiological somatic response. So just notice that where that shame is having an activation in your system. Notice what's emerging out of that. You know, use your gaze as an anchor. As you're noticing that somatic response in your body, I just want to invite you to notice your gaze as you're noticing that physiological response and anchor that. Let the body tremor. Allow it to release. Allow your system to breathe and witness the grief beneath the guilt. Okay? And here is a containment phrase here. This shame is inherited, and I return it. Let me say that again. This shame is inherited. I return it. You don't have to keep anything in your system that doesn't belong to you. Give it back. Give it back to the ancestors. They are in a better position to hold it than you are. It's not yours. Yeah, somebody's getting freed today. And be clear, dissociation, freeze, collapse after boundaries. It's real. Peter Levine, shout out to Somatic Experiencing. Peter Levine teaches that trauma is not the event. It is the incomplete process. Levine's been writing that since 1997, if not sooner. Boundaries often trigger emotional collapse, foggy dissociation, shutdown, over-functioning, panic, numbness. And even Pat Ogan explains that when safety is uncertain, the body often defaults to freeze to prevent overwhelm. Be clear, you aren't broken. Your system is recalibrating. Just an offering here. I want to offer the landing spot, as I'm calling it. Yeah, just take a look around the room and just orient the room slowly. Notice 5 things your eyes can land on. This becomes an invitation to anchor your gaze on what feels safest, less troubled, most affirming. Breathe into the back body, which is a dorsal calming technique. Let your system come out of collapse gently. Here's the containment phrase. My body is allowed to land softly. Send that messaging. Express that to yourself with gentleness, love, and kindness. And be clear, there's also this notion of the silence after the boundary. The silence after the boundary is not empty. It is full of information. It can hold grief, guilt, relief, possibility. How about identity reconstruction? Fear of freedom? What about longing? Winnicott said that developing selfhood requires being alone without feeling abandoned. That was in 1965. I'm going to tell you something interesting, too, that was pretty powerful for me today at church. And when Pastor Salters was preaching and brought the sermon today, I was a bit distracted in the beginning. For you churchgoers, you know what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, because when I walked in, when he started with the sermon. He was just affirming that we all belong regardless to whatever season we traveled through to be here, to be birthed, even for people that felt abandoned or whose parents didn't want them. He was kind of calling the roll in the beginning, but wow. His landing, his hooping moment, as we call it in the Black church, it was so beautiful and personal for me because the sermon reminded me about aloneness and what that really meant. Even when it came to Paul, Paul had moments of aloneness when he was on Damascus Road. He lost his sight. That was restored to him. Even Moses. Like Moses was alone. Moses was what? A Hebrew child who had been put out there in his little boat, and Pharaoh's daughter found him and raised him. He was raised in Pharaoh's house as a prince. And even when the Spirit of the Lord sent Moses back to free the people out of Egypt, Moses said, "Who am I?" Yeah, remember Moses did his thing when he saw them folk harming his people and he buried them in the sand on the beach. Y'all know what I'm talking about. These are early stories for us Christians. While I'm aware that all sorts of people are in my life and they participate with the podcast and all, but just even coming to this place in the episode where Winnicott is making the assertion from 1965, helping us to understand that development of selfhood requires being alone without feeling abandoned. It also happened in biblical stories. Elijah, prophet that had never missed a call, unlike the prophets of today. Nonetheless, I digress because, everybody got an office at the church. Okay, that was a dry wit sense of humor. I'm not mocking the Lord's house and giftedness as a gifted person. I'm really not. But sometimes we need to be reminded that the tribe can't always be with us. Our crew can't always be with us. Our friends, even family members, can't always be with us in some of our development. Our selfhood, coming into the awareness of who we are as we're connected to our source. Our source is wherever we gain strength. My source, as you know, happens to be God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. That is my jam. That is my deal. Spirit often works with us in isolation of ourselves. And I had to be reminded of that today. And it doesn't mean that the Lord has left me. It doesn't mean that my loved ones have abandoned me. It just means when it comes to my selfhood or when it comes to who I am and my destiny and what I've been called to, that's not necessarily a group process. It's highly individuated, and sometimes we can fall in a pity party with ourselves. But just know you are right where you're supposed to be. And let me say that again. Selfhood requires being alone without feeling abandoned. Winnicott wrote that in 1965. Aftercare is teaching your nervous system that silence is not abandonment. It is capacity. Just want to invite you reflectively. Does this silence feel like loss or space? And what is it teaching me? Right? Because we know that there is a silence after the boundary. This becomes an opportunity of rebuilding the self. That is Siegel's work. Daniel Siegel writes that integration, the linking of differentiated parts, is the foundation of mental health. 1999, y'all. Boundaries differentiate. Aftercare integrates. You kind of see how they go together, and you can't have one without the other. They are a cousin, because even when it comes to boundaries, it's not an event, it is a process. And oftentimes we don't engage aftercare well in a healthy way. This is where you ask, who am I without the role? Who am I without the programming? Who am I without who they said I am or supposed to be? Who am I when not managing others' emotions? Who is this version of me who finally said no? This is identity reclamation, y'all. This is where we go to the self spot, people. Notice where your future self lives in the body. I'm going to always take you back to the body, because that is the deal working from a somatic physiological lens. And when we talk about treating trauma, because we know that with trauma, dissociation can be a real thing. And dissociation, I don't find it to be pathology. I find it to be the body's way of safety. Okay? Let me just say that for the people in the back of the room. Okay? So, this becomes an intervention towards selfhood, and I'm calling it the selfhood spot. Notice where your future self lives in the body, and gently let your gaze land where that sensation is strongest. So just kind of use your gaze as you're tracking your body, and let it land where the sensation is strongest, connected to your sense of future self. And allow the imagery, the color, or the shape to emerge, or whatever somatic response you're having. Just know that that is your body speaking. Breathe into the direction of your becoming. I am smiling so widely as I give the invitation for you, y'all, all of us, to breathe into the direction of your becoming. Yes. And affirm that. Here's this containment phrase: I belong to myself now. Yeah. And say that as much as you need to say that until that resonates towards embodiment. Boundaries are not the rupture. Boundaries are the aftershock of rupture. And aftercare is how we tend the nervous system as it reorganizes around truth. Aftercare simply means grieving the role you left behind, metabolizing guilt that isn't yours, letting your nervous system land, reclaiming your identity, learning that silence is not abandonment, and becoming available to yourself, themselves, again. As I said last time, a boundary isn't the end of the story. It is the beginning of becoming. This is the work of returning to yourself with tenderness, dignity, and nervous system clarity. This is Beyond the Spot, decolonizing healing one brain at a time. And I am your girl, Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, licensed professional counselor, brain spotting trainer, and spiritual cheerleader. Until next time, until we meet again, beloved, may your boundaries be gentle, your aftercare be sacred, and your becoming be rooted in truth. Please Have an amazing day. If today's episode resonated with your nervous system or your spirit, share it with someone who's still unlearning and reach out to me. My website is gracecommunitycounseling.com. You can reach me on Instagram at Monroy LPC. That is MONROY LPC. Also, I have offerings from retreats to brain spotting trainings to workshops, you name it. And I am also a speaker. So if you ever need a speaker with my skill set, look me up. Give me a call. Let's see what can happen. And absolutely for you clinicians and adjacent body healers, feel free to reach out and attend a brain spotting training. We have trainings all the time. Thank you.